the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root, from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. And after the completion of a 4-13 season, Seth Cox is with me again tonight, recording on a Tuesday night, episode 389. Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site, and one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast, a show that I highly recommend if you haven't already started listening to the show with the completion of the NFL regular season and the college football season. Now is the time to listen to all those shows and get all the information that you can on the upcoming draft prospects, as we now have the next 3.5 months to talk draft for the Cardinals. We have the end of the season and a lot of changes. The Cardinals have fired Kliff Kingsbury as head coach, and Steve Keim, on a health-related leave of absence, has decided to step away. So he has walked away from his job to focus on his health. And so the Cardinals are looking for a new general manager and a new head coach for 2023. And that's basically what we're going to talk about for the majority of the show. We're going to talk about, well, firing Kliff was the right move. What's next? We'll talk about the GM search. We'll talk about how desirable we think the job is. Are there any guys on the coaching staff the Cardinals should consider keeping? And then we'll touch on a little bit the loss to the 49ers, 38-13, just kind of, that kind of thing. So, Seth, let's get going. The first news was about the general management situation, is that we saw from the Scores Jordan Schultz that Steve Keim was out. We did not know the details of that until later. But then came the news about Kliff Kingsbury. Kliff Kingsbury was fired. He was scheduled to meet with Michael Bidwill Monday afternoon, and he was let go. What I find interesting is the report that since came out is that, well, and what Michael Bidwill himself said, and this is something he said about Steve Wilks as well. Steve Wilks was highly respected in the building. In fact, Bidwill had nothing but praise for him as for his how hard he worked, and Kliff Kingsbury as well. There was nothing Kingsbury himself did wrong as a coach. He did all the right things. He worked really hard. There was no rift between Bidwill and Kingsbury. Kingsbury and Bidwill met regularly. But knowing what we know, do you think that firing Kliff was the right move at this point? Even though then the factor is he signed a 5-year extension 10 months ago, which makes the Cardinals look kind of dumb. Bidwill look like, what were you doing? That said, do you think it was the right move?
I'm not 100% sure at this moment if it's the right move. I think part of it is going to come down to who they end up hiring, and I know that's a cop-out, but we'll get to it shortly. But if they end up just kind of promoting Vance Joseph, isn't that kind of going? Isn't that kind of just chasing your tail? Like, you literally
if you were gonna promote Vance Joseph, why wouldn't you keep Kliff?
Right. Like, your team was 4-13. You know what we're gonna do is we're gonna promote from within and expect a different outcome. I mean, that's that. So there's that. If you end up going, and we're going to talk about, the guys that are being listed, but if you go get a young hotshot offensive coordinator and he flails, it's like, well, you could have just kept paying Kliff and see if, health and maybe a change at the GM position changed things up. But if you go outside the organization, I'll say this. If they just promote Adrian Wilson or Quentin Harris or both to the GM role for permanent or however you want to describe it. If one of those guys becomes the GM of the team, and then they go hire somebody that's not, an established, strong coaching presence, it feels like it's just kind of, like I said, chasing your tail. Like it's changing the name, but nothing's really changing, right? But if you're going to bring in somebody, outside eyes, outside ears, somebody fresh, and try something different, I'm fine with that. But it has to be something different. It can't be we're going to try to do the same thing with just a different name,
Like,
because
go out and try and get like Lincoln Riley or something.
Right. Like we've seen, and I tweeted about this, and you and I have talked about this off the air, obviously, and in text. There's a 3-year arc with success with Arizona Cardinals football. The last, outside of Steve Wilkes, obviously, the last 3 head coaches, the 3 most successful, ironically, head coaches in Arizona Cardinals history. And it's a 3-year thing. Like, and Wisenhunt, obviously in year 2 was his, the highest, but they got back to the playoffs in year 3. Arians in year 3 took them to the NFC Championship game, and Kliff in year 3 got them to the playoffs. And part of it was the philosophy of how they were building those teams, and not building for the present and the future, but saying like, hey, we're going all in. And so when you do that, and then you heard what Michael Bidwell said, he thinks this can be a quick turnaround. That's kind of stating you're going to do the same thing again, right? Like a finger in the dike type of thing, putting a Band-Aid on the situation. And it's like this needs to be something that everybody's on the same page with. And I know fans don't want to hear this, but like a slow 2 to 3 year build while you are looking to the future of like, hey, we have a 25-year-old quarterback. We're talking if he stays healthy, if he is protected, we're talking 8 to 10 years of success. That's what we need to be building towards, not, oh, we need to go for it because this could be Fitz's last year. Oh, we need to go for it because this could be JJ Watt's last year. Oh, we need to go for it because, it could be Arians or Palmer's or, whatever the circumstances were in those times. They need to look at it and say, we've actually got a young guy for once. Let's build this the right way. Let's do this the right way, and let's try to build for the long term and see if that works, as opposed to like, hey, look, in year 2, we went from 4 wins and fired our coach to, in year 2 of, new guy, we're at 8 or 9 wins competing for the playoffs. Oh, look, year 3, we're in the playoffs, we're making a run. And it's like, I don't understand why the bottom keeps falling out in year 4. Like what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, there is something to be said, and I think perhaps the reason why ultimately he was fired is that it had to be done because there was no way, like there was too much baggage almost. Whether it was Kliff's fault or not, there was just too much baggage, or the fact that Keim was leaving. And so if Keim was walking away, Kliff is Keim's hire. If you're trying to rebuild, you need a GM to come in and feel that he's got a guy that he wants. Now, that's not a guarantee that, Kliff couldn't be that guy. But especially with the fan base, the end of season collapses. I get why they needed to do it, but with everything that happened this year, it would make sense to let him coach his way out of that to at least one more year. But I get it. There is something to say, though. Kliff Kingsbury wasn't an abject failure as a head coach. One, the team's improved. There are things that fans obviously don't like, but let's look at, and Peter Schrager mentioned this, and this is probably partially Kliff feeding this to Schrager. But understand this. Kliff didn't have control of his roster, which was by design. And it just depends on like your philosophy with that is how much input a coach gets to have on building a roster and cuts and signings and things like that. He had his general manager disappear. He had 2 guys on his staff get dismissed or leave. And amid all that, after the disaster in Mexico City, the Cardinals were competitive in every single game for the first half. They were, and including that game against San Francisco. So if you look at all of their, if you look at how they finished, because they finished losing 8 of 9, 7 straight, well, like 9 of 10. But the only kind of, there were 2 disasters. That was the end of the both 49ers games. That's because the 49ers are just too talented and they couldn't keep up. But we watched the Cardinals. Their effort never. There was some questionable effort in Mexico City. There was a lot of things going on there. But the way they came out, focused, playing well, playing hard, competitive stuff, down to the very last game, you point to the head coach and you have to say, that's some good coaching. That is leadership that he's there. And he himself, amidst everything, he took all the pressure on himself and took the pressure off the players, put it on his shoulders, knowing that things were not going well, and also knowing and here's one thing that I think that also helped Kliff Kingsbury down the stretch. Now, Kliff aged incredibly over this last year, but there is one thing whenever he was asked, like he was, he could comfortably say he wasn't worried about his future with the team because he got that 5-year extension. Getting that 5-year extension is significant because it didn't change the way he worked. He still prepared and worked and tried to. And he, in fact, one of the things I love about him is that his perspective is he sees how hard these players go, and he knows that he has to be an example. He needs to be that example of consistency, and he did that. He did that, and the fact that the players responded to that means that a lot of the problems that the Cardinals had weren't Kliff related. Some of them you could say maybe he wasn't tough enough on them, and maybe he didn't push the players. But that's a philosophical thing. You see coaches like Tony Dungy, they're not intense. They expect you to do your job, and if you don't do your job, then you just sort of, it's not like you're being coached hard. You just get replaced. So I understand why it was a move that needed to be done. I don't know if it was the right move because there's questions about how attractive this job is moving forward. And at least with Kliff, what you know is that he was going to put in the work and the time and stay consistent. And I've always said this. I even said it with Wilkes back in 2018. I understood why you had to fire him, but it's always good. I think especially when you've seen consistent improvement each year, and there's external circumstances, extenuating circumstances you can't, you have no control over, and that's the fact that this year the Cardinals were extremely unfortunate when it came to injuries and things like that. Dating back to the offseason, you have DeAndre Hopkins' suspension, you have the death of Jeff Gladney just soon after he was signed by the team. You lose 4/5 of your offensive line for much of the season. You lose your quarterback. You lose Budda Baker late in the year.
And you lost Hollywood Brown.
You lost Hollywood Brown. You literally never had a single game of Hopkins, Hollywood, and Rondale Moore, which was the trio that was kind of being planned.
Or Zach Ertz.
Oh, jeez. Use Zach Ertz. There were so many things going against the Cardinals. So I understand why you let Kliff Kingsbury go in that situation. Do I believe that when you're faced with adversity after you've had success, that you should be given the opportunity to come out of it? Yes, there's no guarantees in the NFL, but because he got that contract extension, there are no hard feelings. Kliff's going to coach again because he loves to coach. But he didn't have to stress too much other than his message was consistent down the stretch. He wants guys to get these turned around because he wants it for the players. He wants the players to feel the satisfaction of winning, because if there's something that's really hard in the NFL, it's working as hard as you do to win a game and then to lose. It's depressing. Vance Joseph talked about it this year. It's very depressing. It's very hard to handle emotionally the amount you invest emotionally and physically into a game plan to compete and then to consistently lose. It's very hard on the psyche. And so the fact that Kliff wanted to win, he wanted those guys to feel what it's like to win again. And he wasn't worried about himself, because he didn't have to worry about himself. He knows he can coach again. He will get hired somewhere, and he's getting paid a crap ton of money. And so I think he was genuine down the stretch that he was not worried about that. Like, he wanted it to work out here. Like, it's not like he got the extension and started loafing. He put in the work. He wanted things to work out here. Michael Bidwill wanted it to work out here for Kliff, because he really respects him as a coach, and I think he really likes him as a person. But it was one of those business moves there, because there was no good way out of it. Because if you bring him back, there was definitely a number of fans, a good number of fans, who never would have accepted that and probably would have been very unhappy from the beginning. And so the idea of cleaning house and starting over, whether it's starting over or just a breath of fresh air, I think it was the right move, even though I normally don't like seeing that.
Well, and like I said yesterday, or what I tweeted out yesterday, I mean, here's the reality. Whether or not people want to dog on Kliff, that's fine. You're wrong. And the reason I can say that is because in 4 seasons, he has the third most wins in Arizona Cardinals history. So since they moved to Arizona, behind only Bruce Arians and Ken Wisenhunt, who, Wisenhunt did it in 6 seasons. Arians did it in 5. He has, in the franchise's history, the 7th most wins. So again, like,
those are comically, I mean, the fact that we're talking about a fired coach after a disaster year, and 2 of the seasons that he had were losing seasons.
Right. And so he's one of only,
it's sad.
It is, and he's one of only 7 coaches to ever make the playoffs in this franchise's history. So, I mean, no matter what you want to say about Kliff did more in his time here than most coaches ever do. And again, I'm not saying that, for that reason he should have been kept. I'm saying, like, the reality is, between, Gene Stallings, Hank Coleman, Joe Bugle, Buddy Ryan, Dave McGinnis, Denny Green, and Steve Wilkes, like, none of those guys.
Tobin, don't forget Vince Tobin. He took him to the playoffs.
Tobin made the playoffs. Obviously Wisenhunt and Arians, like that. Those are the names in Arizona. There's 4 coaches in Arizona since they moved to Arizona 4 years ago now, that have made the playoffs. That's it. So, like, you can talk poorly about Kliff. You can think, he didn't do anything. He was terrible. The reality is he was one of the 3 best coaches the Arizona Cardinals have ever had.
Right. So then the question now is, what's next? That's the thing that's so interesting, because while the coaching search that kind of right now has been the GM search, we're going to talk a little bit about that. The buzz that we're hearing is, if you look at betting sites, that Sean Payton is the favorite. He is the name out there. They're going to give a long look to Vance Joseph, whether that is just lip service to make sure that he does not feel like Steve Wilkes did when he was only given 1 year to coach, that he's going to get real consideration. I don't think that'll be a problem, because the Cardinals as an organization have never really had that problem. They've always been open to diversity type hires. But you give Vance Joseph, who's been a head coach before, who's well respected in the locker room. So that we'll say that is that you can tell that Vance Joseph does have his thumb on the pulse of this team. He just didn't have the head coaching title to it. Vance Joseph is being considered. Obviously, I think Sean Payton is on the table. Michael Bidwill would not comment as to any of the people that he's talking. But what do you do next? Because some of the names out there, Okay, you got D'Amico Ryans is kind of a hot name out there, but is the Cardinals have done the promotion, take a coordinator and promote him to head coach, give him his first head coaching job a number of times. Joe Bugle was a first-time head coach.
I think
McGinnis was a first-time head coach. Wisenhunt was a first-time head coach. Arians was a first-time head coach.
Wilkes was a first-time
head coach. They have done this over and over again. And so and
Vince Tobin was a first-time head coach as well. In Arizona, or in the NFL at least.
And then he went on to coach. He went on and didn't he coach? It was Indy after that. I couldn't remember if he'd coached Indy before the Cardinals or if it was after Indy. So
was he okay? He was just the DC in Indy. Was
okay.
he? Did he do a interim thing?
Maybe that was it.
He might have. I mean,
that was so long ago.
and then to your point, even the Hank Coleman guy was a first-time head coach, and he was a guy.
He was just interim when they fired Gene Stallings.
Yeah, right, and so
yeah. So Vince Tobin was also a first-time head coach.
Yeah, so I mean, you look at it like, and
Kliff,
so
Kliff in his favor, he was not a first-time head coach. He was just a first-time NFL coach.
Right. Well, and so this is what people always say. Right, and they go, it's one of 32 jobs. Somebody's going to take a chance, and it's like, I agree, somebody's going to take a chance,
but that's not what we want. We're trying to fit what's the best option for the Cardinals to replace Kingsbury. Is that a hot shot? Is that a hot shot? Assistant coordinator who's ready for the next one? Is it taking the retread? We're going to go old. Jim Caldwell, Frank Reich just fired. Though I will say this, I thought the world of Frank Reich in 2019, and I thought he should have been on the table then.
And I still think it wouldn't be. I mean, he's not even coming up as a candidate, which is crazy to me. But I still think he would be a deserving.
He's been a head coach now. He has a coach, he's worked with a number of. He's had good offenses. He's done work with some good quarterbacks. His time in Indy, the issue is that when he was working with Jacoby Brissett, he was working with a washed up Matt Ryan. Oh my gosh, what happened to Matt Ryan? And they were successful with Phillip Rivers. They didn't make the playoffs, but they were successful.
But so going back to the hiring a new guy thing, when you look at it, a lot of the times you look at who they hire, right? And so you go to Joe Bugle. Joe Bugle was obviously a hot commodity coming from Washington
because he had built those offensive lines and coached those offensive lines and coached that offense that had won Super Bowls.
Right. And so, but that's the thing is what people struggle to understand is that just because you work in a functioning organization doesn't mean you understand how to implement the same functions. Does that make sense?
Right.
So just because you've seen Bill Belichick do things doesn't mean you're going to be a good coach because you're not Bill Belichick. You're a guy that's trying to do things like Bill Belichick. And there's a reason that all of Belichick's disciples, for the most part, fail. And
because it's Belichick's stuff.
Right. And so
it's Belichick's system.
And so that's the thing you have to figure out. You look at Dave McGinnis, that was, let's be honest, that wasn't a great hire by any means. That was McGinnis.
He was so likable.
Right. And he was a guy that was super, super important in getting the stadium bill passed, that they kind of did him a favor, because remember, he went 1-8 as the interim head coach that year. So, like, they fired Vince Tobin. They were 2-5. They fired Vince Tobin. He went 1-8, and they're like, you know what, Dave, you get the job. That's kind of how I feel about the Vance Joseph thing. If I'm being completely honest with you, like that's kind of how it would feel. So that's the thing is, and so it's you can't expect a D'Amico Ryans to come in and create an atmosphere like they have in San Francisco, because that means that they're going to have, and something we'll talk about, a general manager that is cut from the same cloth, that comes from that same ilk and that same identity, right? And so that's kind of where you always have questions, and why so many teams usually, when they make moves, they move on from their coach and the GM. They don't just fire one, because there is a synergy that needs to be found in that. And so, that is the one thing I'll say about a guy like D'Amico Ryans. Like, if Ryans comes and he's interested, which, is always good as well, let's be honest, because we have seen the Cardinals get turned down by
guys like Mike McCarthy, Mike McCord previously,
Eric
Bieniemy, Mike Mularkey.
So, if D'Amico Ryans is interested, you wonder, looking at like a Brian Daboll in New York, if that's a situation where you might see them go outside of Arizona and look at the GMs in Adam Peters or Ron Carthon, who are both 49ers front office guys. And I'm not saying that Ryans would be like, oh, it has to be a package deal, but if you're looking,
but they'd have the sort of the same vision as to what to build.
Right, exactly. You're talking about like, hey, we're all in that building together. We see the synergy and how everything works. Now, you and I were talking off the air. What's the big concern when you hire a defensive coordinator?
Who's your offensive guy? And if
and
he's good, how are you going to replace him when he gets hired by somebody?
Right. And so you look at that, and you look at, we were talking about Robert Saleh, right? Like, had a great run in San Francisco as their DC, had a decent enough season for the Jets, but they're, moving on again. And so you look at it and you say, okay, when do these guys, and are they able to function on both sides of things? Once as the defensive coordinator, so like if Ryans comes in, who's he able to bring on as his offensive coordinator? And is he going to be able to, retain him over the years and be able to do those things? You look at what Saleh's done in New York. I mean, it's phenomenal. They were 32nd in yards and 32nd in points. Their defense given up last year. They were 4th in both categories this year. 4th. Like, that's a huge swing. Their offense was okay. Like, it went from
there were games that were good, but the end of the season gross. They ended the season gross.
Right. And so that's what you look at. And we talked about, look at Todd Bowles. Todd Bowles is one of the best defensive minds in the NFL. I don't think many people are going to disagree with that. You're talking about a guy who did it in Arizona, earned that shot in New York, but let's be honest, struggled in New York as the head coach with that same issue. 10-6 his first year, and then back to back 5-11 years before going 4-12 and getting fired. Right.
Yep. And then, he inherits the Bruce Arians team. He's got Tom Brady. They do have a number of the injuries on the offensive line, but then you take Bruce Arians out of the equation, and now it's just Byron Leftwich doing the offensive play calling and building the offensive game plan, and you have a Bucs team where the offense was just horrific.
Well, I mean, look at it. I mean, since 2019 when Arians was there, and remember that 2019 was before Tom Brady was there, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
that was the 30. Yeah. That was the 30 interception.
Jameis year, yeah. So they had, you look at it, like Tampa's offense was 7th in yards and 3rd in points. Then Brady gets there, they're 2nd in yards. Or sorry, they were 3rd in yards and 3rd in points. Then Brady gets there, they're 7th in yards and 3rd in points. Last year, they're 2nd in yards, 2nd in points. This year, not much has changed. Obviously, they're having some injury issues. 15th in yards, 25th in points. Like, it's a tough thing, man. And this is not to say I don't want D'Amico Ryans. I think D'Amico Ryans would be a fantastic fit. I think he would be a great defensive leader for this team, but like you've got to sell me on who's going to be running that offense. Like that's the biggest thing, because as we've seen, that's where the league is right now, and it's an unfortunate reality. It really is. It's an unfortunate reality, but that's where the league is right now, is that offense is the key. And if you're bringing in a D'Amico Ryans and you have a great defense like the Jets or like the Bears had under Vic Fangio or the Denver Broncos have had, it doesn't matter, because if your offense is garbage, then you're not going anywhere.
Right. So it's going to be hard. I think you'll be able to sell me on probably most of the head coach candidates who end up getting hired. But it's going to feel probably like a disappointment if it's not Sean Payton. That's just how it feels. It feels like there's enough energy toward that being a possibility, the pedigree he has. Though we'll say, look at the two, previous NFL head coaches who'd had success, who came to the Cardinals. They didn't have that much success in Buddy Ryan or Denny Green. They came with a pedigree of contending, of winning games, of postseason. And Peyton is that guy. If you don't get Peyton, it's a lot of unknowns. So I don't know. But let's move for that. Go for it.
But like you were going to say, like I think that the comforting thing with Sean Payton is obviously he's been great for a long time, but he's going to bring in Vic Fangio. Like he's already stated, like Vic Fangio is going to be my defensive coordinator.
That is a big positive.
And so you look at it and you go, oh, okay. So who his, he was a head coach for 15 freaking years in New Orleans. That's unheard of.
And had success offensively. Not obviously you had Drew Brees, the Hall of Famer, but he was able to do things offensively and build them for,
Well, you look at it. I mean,
Jameis Winston, and you've got Taysom Hill, and he's been able to do things for. So the thought that you can look at Kyler Murray, and you could see what he could do, and what was, I think he said on what you want to do with Kyler Murray is you want to take some of the pressure off him, and then you got to give him, like they said, got to give him layups. It felt like for the 4 years that Kyler was playing here that they needed him to be a star almost every single game, or it wasn't going to go well. And to be able to build, make things easier. So let him make plays, but don't rely on him to make plays every single play. Nobody can do that.
No, and that's the thing is everybody looks at it and goes, well, look at Patrick Mahomes, look at Josh Allen. Okay, so look at the two best quarterbacks in the NFL. Why aren't you there? And so that's what you're saying basically. And so that's my thing is we know what Peyton would do in terms of offense because we've seen it. We know what Fangio would do, and I think that's the biggest comfort of the whole situation. I guess we could just quickly go over what the odds are of like who the head coaches are going to be, or for the Cardinals, and like you said, it's the number one guy is Sean Payton. So you have Payton as the guy, and then next is Vance Joseph, but then you got Shane Steichen. So Steichen is, they just moved it. Holy cow. Interesting. But so Steichen, is the OC for Philadelphia. That's really intriguing because we've seen Philly's offense grow under Jalen Hurts. So we'll see how that goes. Byron Leftwich is a name we all know. I don't know how you would feel about that. Probably not where I would want it to be.
That would be like, I understand what Bruce Arians thought about but Leftwich, but after this season, with what Tampa did offensively, I don't understand how anyone could be excited about Byron Leftwich. It was believed. There were a lot of people who believed that if Adrian Wilson with Byron Leftwich was going to be a package deal had Adrian gotten hired somewhere. But that would be a hard sell.
It really
the guy this year.
It really would. And so you just look at it. I mean, there's just not a ton of guys where you're like, oh, this is who I'm comfortable with. And so I think Peyton's just, and I don't want to take away from what Peyton is as a head coach and as a head coaching candidate. I just think he's the easiest, most comfortable guy in the whole situation.
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. After a long discussion of the head coach situation, let's talk about the GM search, who the candidates are. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Steve Keim did not get fired. He decided to walk away. He stepped down from his position, which I'll be honest, with that news, unless there's this great conspiracy, maybe this ultimately has been about his health, that there is something underlying there. There were some whispers about, things between Bidwell and Keim not being as solid. Maybe it really is just his health. Anyway, he stepped away from the organization. There was a report that there was the doors open for him to return in a lesser capacity. And it sounds, but between that, because that report came out before the announcement that he had stepped down, things make a little more sense. It was a case where the Cardinals, in particular Bidwell, didn't want him to leave the organization completely. They understood that he might need to step down from the day-to-day of the GM position because of the stress and things. If his health is an issue, but if it really wasn't unless it's a lot of us think that there's this conspiracy covering up some bad stuff, that he's just being quietly pushed away. I don't think that would be the issue if they wanted him, the door being open to come back in a lesser position, meaning Keim decided to tender his resignation. Bidwell says, hey, I understand, but if you still want to be here, we have these other roles for you. That said, Keim's out. He left the organization. He's gone. 25 years of half his life has been with the Cardinals. 10 years as general manager. Now we're in an interesting position because the Cardinals, outside of Buddy Ryan, have not had an external general manager hire since before Arizona, because Larry Wilson was already the general manager. He had been in the organization forever. He's a Hall of Fame player. He coached. He'd been in the front office. And so he is this internally. That's been like the whole family organization. So from Larry Wilson to Bob Ferguson, from Larry Wilson to Buddy Ryan to Bob. For Buddy Ryan was the one, but he was GM and head coach. I don't consider that kind of the same thing. Bob Ferguson was promoted after Ryan was fired. Rod Graves was promoted. Steve Keim was promoted. the path seems clear to either be Quentin Harris or Adrian Wilson, or even the possibility of a co-GM situation, which feels like a cop-out, but I understand how the organization, because they respect the heck out of both of those guys. Both of them are deserving. Absolutely, both of them are deserving of GM positions. Adrian Wilson he's kind of been groomed on the fast track, and Quentin Harris has been there the entire time. So you know that I can see a scenario with that, but they have more. So they have more, and Michael Bidwell said that they had already interviewed one external candidate. He would not say who that was. And then there are 3 other names. So we know of 4 outside names five outside names that have come up in terms of who the Cardinals are seeking to interview. 2 are from the 49ers organization. They got Adam Peters, assistant GM Adam Peters, and one of the directors is Ron Carthon from the Chicago Bears, and Cunningham, assistant GM over there. Jerry Reese, former GM of the New York Giants, and then a name that something Austin Fort, who is with the Titans.
Monty Austin Fort.
And so those are the candidates. Who? I think for me, I think what would be a really, really interesting hire would be Reese. I don't know if I like it the most, but if you're kind of trying to do things differently instead of new GM, and you want to go with someone who's been part of been an organization that's built championship teams, Reese is kind of intriguing, isn't he?
Yeah, so Reese was, part of their staff when they won the Super Bowl. He was the GM for both of them. Okay.
Right. That's the really intriguing thing.
So he came up with the Giants basically like
he's a Steve Keim, because he started out as a college scout in '94, was a pro scout, director of player personnel, general match. He basically did the same thing that Steve Keim did, but with the Giants.
So he was at UT Martin for 7 years, and then went to the Giants, and like you said, built his way up through there. Was there for a decade, and I mean, it's always interesting to go back and look at these, teams and why they moved on. But since they fired Jerry Reese when they were 3-13 his final year, so let's be fair. 5-11, 4-12, 6-10, 4-13. 9-7-1. They made the playoffs this year, and so that's the thing, is it's not always easy to move on from a guy, especially when you win 2 Super Bowls in a decade. In fact, I mean, I'm pretty sure if the Cardinals won 2 Super Bowls, most fans would be okay if they just gave Jerry Reese a lifetime contract, right? Like, they're just like, whatever, just do whatever you want until you leave. But I mean, you look at it, they've got, they went to the playoffs. Let's see here. 4 times in his 10 years. They were over 500 in all but 4 seasons, and most of those 4 seasons were in the last 4 years. So it's tough, but like you said, he's been a part of constructing a winning organization, and I get that he was there beforehand, but he came in and Eli was in year 4, I want to say, year 3, year 4. So, similar situation to the Kyler.
Yeah. To me, that's just, it's kind of, it's the least Cardinals thing to do, but maybe that's the one that's going to happen, because everyone else is a promotion so far. So everyone else is someone that would be their next move. All these other candidates. I'm very intrigued about the Jerry Reese, especially since, he's not, like, right now, he's 59 years old. So he's not even, like, old. Like, he's roughly Like, how old is Steve Keim? I don't know that.
Steve Keim was
He's 50.
50. So yeah, so I mean, that's the thing is like Reese is a guy that's, like I said, he's built winning football teams. He's built a winning football culture. It'll be interesting to see if and when he gets hired again somewhere, because I mean, he's just been out of the NFL kind of hanging out for the last 7 years. So that's my one concern, is it's like he hasn't been active or involved in the NFL scene, the day-to-day NFL scene, in 7 years. And let's be honest, a lot has changed since then.
So these other guys, obviously you've got two candidates for the 49ers, which is really kind of intriguing, especially when you consider the possibility of a D'Amico Ryans as being a candidate. You've got assistant general manager Adam Peters, who's been with them, been with the Bears as well. And then you've also got Ryan Carthon, who I don't know, remember the background for him.
Cantron's the director of
he's the director of player personnel for the 49ers, which is basically what.
And it is ran RAN,
yeah,
like he ran the ball.
So he is essentially what Quentin Harris was before Quentin Harris got the VP title. It says he deals a lot with the evaluation of players, both pro and college, and he also does market analysis for players and with free agency strategy. It's interesting. So the kind of the role that he has. Oh, okay, that makes sense. He is the son of Maurice Carthon. If you're old enough, he was of those 90s teams of the Giants when Phil Simms was there. Maurice Carthon was their fullback. So that is Rand Carthon's father, Maurice Carthon. So he's got NFL pedigree in his lifetime. He played college football, but he's been in front offices for a while. That would be one that makes sense. It would come from he and both Adam Peters would come from a background of the 49ers and their talent building, because we know that with the 49ers, basically the only thing that's snake bitten them is the quarterback position, and everything else they've kind of had. And it would be interesting to see that. That said, I don't know much about Ian Cunningham. He was part of the accelerator program that both Adrian Wilson and Quentin Harris were part of. So he's supposedly an up and coming star within the front offices of the NFL. And I don't know anything about Austin Ford.
No, I mean, some of these guys are just, I don't want to say throwing stuff at the wall, but you look at Ian Cunningham. He's a guy that's been kind of around quite a bit. He's been he was in Philly. That's where I was. Sorry. Started director of college scouting, moved up to assistant director of player personnel, and finally was director of player personnel. So he's done kind of everything. And so if it's interesting, because I know a lot of people like Cunningham, but he was part of the group that traded the 32nd overall pick for Chase Claypool, and that always makes me nervous.
Austin Ford, he had his background, heavy Patriots. He was with the Patriots for 15 seasons, dating back from 2003 to 2019. So he was a personal assistant. He was an area scout, national scout, assistant director of college scouting, and director of college scouting up through 2019. So this is, and they won 4 Super Bowls during the time that he was in the scouting department. Not bad.
No, and that's the thing, is like we talked about, if you're going to bring in if you're going to bring in a Patriots guy, obviously they're not looking at any Patriots coaches, but a Patriots guy, that's one of the things you need. So going back to Cunningham, he started with the Ravens, so he's been in some really impressive front offices between the Ravens, and he was with the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl, and then left to be the assistant GM with the Bears this year. So like, obviously the Ravens won a Super Bowl while he was there. He saw that. The Eagles won a Super Bowl while he was there. And then he was only with the Bears for 1 year. So I guess I can kind of, he wasn't, I won't pin too much on him.
But those are all very intriguing, just kind of the background there. But let's go on a little bit. So coming up next on the Rise Up Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Just how desirable are the jobs that the Cardinals have vacated? That's coming up next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise Up Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. The interesting thing, we've talked about this on previous shows, is just how intriguing or how desirable is the Cardinals' general manager and head coaching job. I look at the coaching position. You could look at it one of two ways. One, you could look at it and say, okay, you've got a young star in Kyler Murray, but will he be the same after the ACL? He's not going to be able to play for at least the first half of this, probably the first quarter of the season. They have Colt McCoy as their other quarterback. Kyle's not going to be able to do any of our offseason work. So it's not going to be, and they don't have a general manager. Or you could look at it like this. You have a no-pressure year. You have a no-pressure year in 2023, potentially, because Kyler's going to be hurt. And if Kyler comes back and isn't good, then you've got the benefit of a potentially, you're not expected to do much in year one because you're playing without your quarterback. And if the quarterback doesn't fully recover, then you'll be in a position to be able to get a different quarterback maybe and move on from Kyler if they need to. That's obviously a worst kind of case scenario. The other kind of question is about Michael Bidwill as an owner, and there seems to be the notion that Bidwill wants his hands in things, like he's way involved, and he kind of addressed this. And so I don't know, like, do we just believe him? How much is the case? Bidwill says his role is he asks why. He asks his general manager and head coach to tell him what things are doing and why. He doesn't. He says, like, I don't dictate what moves to make or this or that. Now maybe the two things that maybe were the case was, one, getting Kyler paid, and two, Larry Fitzgerald's contract, because Fitz always negotiated directly with Bidwill. But other than that, if Bidwill is saying what he's saying, because this is different than Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones unabashedly says, "Yeah, I'm going to put this football team together." Bidwill says he believes he's within his definitely what he should do as an owner, the one who's paying all the bills, to be able to ask his people to explain and justify what it is they're doing.
Yeah, and that's, the thing is, and here's what I'll say about the whole situation, is that when the owner of the team is also the team president, it tends to make things messy because they do want to be involved, and they want to be involved in the day-to-day because that's what a team president does, right? Like, team presidents are involved in day-to-day stuff. But you have to remember that the first job you have as the owner is to be an owner. And you're supposed to hire people that you trust and let them work and do things that they believe is best for the team, regardless of what the bottom line says. And now as the owner, you can say, no. we can't do X, Y, or Z. But the problem becomes when you're also the team president and you're basically saying, let me run that up the flagpole. Oh, wait, that's me. That's when stuff troubles. And so it's going to be, an interesting thing because the Cardinals have a reputation. Let's just be honest. There's a reason that a lot of candidates don't want to interview here. And part of the reason is because it is looked at sometimes as a incestuous organization where, like you said, the GMs, they come from within. Like they don't go changing much. And the rumor or feeling, right or wrong, amongst the outside world is because that Bidwell wants to be involved in those things, and he kind of wants yes men. Like he wants guys that are going to be okay with him butting in, where a lot of organizations, the owner is not involved in the day-to-day stuff like that. And so that's just the oddity of the situation. And so it's going to be interesting to see how it comes, because from the aspect of what you talked about, I think you can sell, like I said the other day, you sell this opening as you've got a chance to sell a head coach. This is what I said, at a top 3 pick, no stress until Kyler is back. And then if Kyler comes back and doesn't regain his form, you're probably going to be bad enough because the rest of your team's bad right now that you're going to pick highly in 24, and you can go get a Caleb Williams or a Drake May or Quinn Ewers, like those are the next quarterbacks. And people will say, well, you can't get rid of Kyler in 24 either. You don't have to get rid of Kyler. You can let him come back, be the veteran for one season, and then move on. But like
because you got a guy on a rookie contract, which is
right.
Just you can do that. It's not ideal, but
no, it's not. It's not. So, it's just one of those situations where it's just really in the eye of the beholder. Like if a guy like Sean Payton comes in, he's coming here because he's going to be able to kind of rule the roost, so to speak. He's going to get the keys to the kingdom. Allegedly, remember back in 2019, before they hired Kliff, that's what they offered Mike McCarthy, right? And McCarthy said, thanks, no thanks. I don't know if we'll never know if that's true or not, obviously, but that was reported. And so that's the same, you would assume the same thing with Sean Payton. And so does that mean a guy like Jeff Ireland comes in, a guy that he's worked with before that's in New Orleans now? I don't know what the whole situation is, but I can tell you, like, it just depends on who you are, because I've seen some analysts say this is, the second or third best opening. I've seen some analysts say this is the worst opening. It just,
right. Ultimately, as I already said, there are only 32 GM positions and 32 NFL head coaching positions. So these are positions that, especially if they haven't had it, everyone wants to do. Right. If it's not their first one, they can be picky. Vance Joseph has said that as much. That first head coaching job, you jump at it because it's a head coaching job. Once you've experienced that, and then you've kind of get in a comfortable place, like Joseph is here in Arizona, and then you like the position you're in, you can afford to be, I want the right situation. But the first time you go for it, because you never know when the next time it's going to come up.
No, you don't. And you never know. And let's be honest. Those 4 or 5 year contracts, those are big, and people can say whatever they want, but the reality is those guarantees don't come along very often.
No, they don't. With that, coming next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on to the next segment. We're going to talk about, is there anybody on the coaching staff that they should retain? That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise of See Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. This probably will not be a super long segment, but if we're looking at the staff, when you let go of a head coach with 5 years left, you have a Steve Keim walk away. You've got guys on your staff, your coaching staff, that have also got extensions. For example, Vance Joseph signed a 2-year extension and turned in this year, so he is signed through next year. If they let him go, they're going to eat another year. So the Cardinals are already eating 5 years of Kingsbury, and that comes on the heels after basically they had eaten 3 years of Steve Wilkes, and then they cleared out most of the coaching staff. Is there anyone on this coaching staff that you would like to keep around? Whether it be a Vance Joseph, whether it be, say, Cam Turner, whether it is Sean Jefferson or Matt Burke, their defensive line coach they just added, Charlie Bullen. Is there anyone that we should consider that wouldn't be bad to keep around?
I mean, Jeff Rogers, maybe I would be okay with. After that, I mean, I wasn't super impressed with anybody. I'm looking through it. Marcus Robertson and Greg Williams, I don't mind. I think,
and the truth is, all of those guys almost all those guys on the defensive staff are Vance's guys.
Right, exactly.
So they will follow Vance somewhere else. Charlie Bullen was with him with the Dolphins. The defensive backs coach, I believe, was with him in Denver. So most of the guys that are on the defensive side of the ball were Vance guys. So it's not likely that any of them will stay if Vance is let go.
Oh. And so, I mean, outside of Rodgers, nobody really, tickles my fancy, if you will.
I mean, the Mike Berkovici's kind of intriguing because he's still young. He's had some experience with that. You've got Sean Jefferson, I think, was...
Actually, I'll change that. Steve Hayden I'd keep.
Hayden has been... It's been interesting because he's been around on multiple staffs. It's kind of like the Freddie Kitchens for a while ago, but pretty solid to have on staff. Obviously, the name that you would have figured that they wanted to keep around was Sean Kugler, and they fired him. So that's
right.
They fired him. So
yeah, he's gone. So
what about, say, Buddy Morris? Because after they had the long-time trainer, they brought Bruce brought in Buddy, but then you look at, I don't know, how much do you put on the training staff and the strength and conditioning for what's happened this year? Because most of the injuries that these guys have had are they're not like conditioning issues.
I haven't been super happy with Buddy Morris since he got here because they've had a lot of soft tissue injuries, which makes me wonder if it is this strength and conditioning coach. So that's what I would say about that situation.
So ultimately, I guess it doesn't really matter. Well, and you look at it because most of those guys didn't have much connection to these were all Keim hired head coaches and assistants along with Kliff.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That's the other really intriguing thing about the Kliff era was that a lot of these guys Kliff didn't hire, or they weren't Kliff guys.
Right, like he was part of the hiring process, but they didn't have connections to him.
Yeah, so it's just an interesting, there was a very interesting dynamic, the Kliff era, of how things are run, right?
Yeah. So with that, we have a little bit left to talk about. Coming next on the Rise of Seared podcast, Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the web. There was an actual football game on Sunday. Was there anything to take away from that? That's coming next on Rise of Seared. We're back on the Rise of Seared podcast, Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the web. Last segment, the Cardinals actually played a football game on Sunday, even though it ended up being a disaster. But it was one of these cases where the Cardinals, and it was just like when they played in Mexico against the 49ers, they played them tight and competitively for the first half, and then the wheels fell off eventually. It's very interesting because they were kind of competitive the first half, then things started going south with that defense, turnovers, whatnot. Yeah. What was there anything good other than the effort that they gave, especially in the first half? Is there anything good that came out of that? And the ending to J.J. Watt's career where he's able to pick up 2 more sacks. He was dominant in the first half. You got that feel-good story showing that he can still play football, and I think it was the perfect way for him because that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be able to leave knowing he could still play football.
Yeah, and we talked about that. I think that and being able to walk off the field was a big deal to him, not be on the sideline and wave, from street clothes, but be able to walk off the field one last time, especially in a game like that where you have basically a throwback game. You finish with 2, like you said, 2 sacks. I think he had 5 tackles for loss or something like that. Like he was super, super dominant. Sorry, 3 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits, and a pass defense. Like, what a dominant game. I think that was big. I continue to be impressed with the growth of Trey McBride.
It does make you excited about
when Zach Ertz comes back. Yeah, and I mean, if that was AJ Green's last game, that's cool to see him make one more big play, right?
Yeah, that was, and then but when you see that happen, you're like, why didn't they do that more?
I mean, to be fair, it was kind of a lucky play too. I mean, he went up over 2 guys and made a play. It was good to see though. Outside of that, man, I mean, there was just not a lot to write home about.
David Blau wasn't particularly good.
No, Blau struggled. The offensive line wasn't great. They didn't obviously. I mean, when your lead running back is Corey Clement, and that's not a shot at Clement, but like this guy.
Clement's been a guy that's primarily been a special teams player his entire career, and now he was the primary running back, which means, yeah. And then your starting cornerbacks are a 7th round rookie and an undrafted guy that's bounced on and off your roster over the space of 2.5 years. You have no Zaven Collins. You have no Zach Allen. I did like. I mean, well, then on top of that, then Josh Jones gets hurt, and you're like, oh boy. I hope it's minor, because that would be stupid. It would just be stupid to have another a major offensive line injury, especially to happen in the final game of the year when Kelvin Beachum is likely. They probably did not plan on having Kelvin Beachum back next year, and they were going to go with Josh Jones at right tackle. Now, if Josh Jones has himself a serious knee injury, that changes things.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting because there, like you said, there just wasn't a lot to write home about. This was a game where you were hoping to get out of it clean. They did for the most part, like you said. We got to find out about Josh Jones, but it was, it was a case of you couldn't even get excited about the young players like Dortch and McBride because they're not able to even do much because there's so little talent on the field. So, I think it was, like you said, it was good to see them play hard again for a half. It continues to baffle how they can be out schemed in the second half of games so badly, but that might be our next head coach. So if if that's what happens, we gotta get ready to talk about that, right?
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh. So yes, mainly things went as planned. They gave a good effort, lost handily, finished with 13 losses, got the number 3 pick. Thanks, Broncos.
Yeah, I guess that was the
that worked out. That was actually fantastic, and I think this has honestly been the first time. I don't remember how I reacted towards the end of the 2018 season, but because they were just so bad, we were in a situation here where I always root for the Cardinals to win, and I was like, why bother? Why bother? They stopped playing anyone, and it worked out that they actually ended the top 3 pick. Now, what in the world, Texans? What were they doing? They basically had the number 1 pick locked up all entire season, and they go and win a game.
Well, and, I mean, they converted a 4th and 20.
What are you doing?
I think that I truthfully, and like no insight, like I truthfully really believe that was Lovie Smith's last FU to the Texans of like
that makes sense. He knew he was going out.
Right. Like this is you're gonna fire me, and this is what you gave me. You know what? Here you go.
But let's be honest. That Colts team was atrocious.
Well,
they were so bad.
It'll be interesting to see what happens, because the only glimmer of hope I would have if the Cardinals did promote Vance Joseph to head coach would be if the Colts retained Jeff Saturday, because then at least
they wouldn't look nearly as bad.
Right, exactly. That would be the biggest thing.
Yeah. So we have so much more to talk about over the course of this offseason. We'll probably, I imagine maybe by next week we might have rumor of a general manager in place, but we can start talking about the roster and things like that. So we will be back. You know, we've wrapped up this show 389. Next show 390 next week. We'll be back again to talk about more offseason stuff, because this is going to be an offseason of change. Hopefully it's not an offseason mess like it's basically the Cardinals will remain in the news as they have for a while, only hopefully no longer will it because of scandals and dumb stuff. And now we're just overhauling everything and trying to. So we'll be back again next week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess. This is Rise Up C-Red Podcast. Thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red Podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.
Run!